So I'm just going to paint these fuchsias. This is just going to be a loose, fun painting. We're just going to start off with a little bit of water. This is just going to be a loose indicator of the shape of the flowers and deciding how large I want to put them on the paper and where I want them to be. We're going to let the shapes kind of merge into each other. So you can't really see this water, but as soon as I add colour, you'll have a better idea of what it is I'm doing here. So, okay, let's get some of that magenta on there, and you can see, and watch what happens when I touch it into the water. It's gonna just spread and flow a little bit. And now I know there's a lot of purple, watch this. There's a deep purple colour there in those fuchsias. We'll get to that in a minute, but for now we are just working on these basic shapes. We can add more water. If you get drips like that, you can just add some clear water and wash it away. And this is just going to add to the loose and fluid effect. And you see, anytime I put the brush onto the white paper where there's no water, you get quite a crisp edge. But the rest of it is going to be quite loose. Okay, and you can see, this is just the straight color. I haven't mixed anything here. Again, that's something we can get to later if you want to worry about color accuracy. But for now, we're just going to get a bit of a idea of these tulips. There are some buds, so we can add a couple of little dots around the place. We can just indicate some of those. And you know, there's only 4 flowers on this branch, but if we want, you know, it's your painting, so you can decide maybe, you know, just maybe I want another flower there. So I can just put that in. Doesn't even look like a flower, but it's just part of this idea of just painting very loosely. It's almost abstract at the moment. Now the other color that we had was, I mentioned at the beginning, this color is much deeper. Red, so this is like a cool red, and this is a warm red. This is the alizarin. So if we want to warm up some of those colors, you know, this is a nice time to add some. And you can see it's mixed, because all this paint is still wet, it's gonna mix and bleed and create different effects. Now I think we'll actually, it can be a good idea to leave details until the end, but I think it might be nice to get in a little bit of the stem at this stage. And I might use a different brush for that, just because I'm using this red color, and I think this is a good color for the stem. It's not really a brown, and you can just get the indicator, and not worrying about being too precise. You know, we can even add some water and soften those buds a bit. And then this is getting into a bit of painting, getting a bit of colour into the background as well. Because you don't, now you can see the colour is a little paler as it dries. So you can come back later with some stronger color. But for now, I'm going to take the ultramarine blue. And this time we will mix because we want a really nice deep purple. Sometimes if I want a deep purple, I'll use dioxazine purple, but it's a really strong color. So just for now, and you can see there's, that's going to give us a real deep purple. And you can also just look, the way I'm using the brush, you're just touching the paper so lightly. And this is one of the things that's just so critical with watercolor painting, is learning how to use a really light touch. You don't have to scrub it now. And you can see I'm trying to define this fuchsia just a little bit more shape. But we'll leave most of the definition for the final step. And I'm even leaving lots of bits of white paper here. Now this fuchsia is a bit paler than those ones, because if we say that's our focal point, we want some stronger colours there. And outside of that, we maybe want them to be a bit lighter. But I'll put a little bit more colour in there. I might even mix this magenta and alizarin. And you can see that just gives that. And there's you can add more water just to lighten the colour. In watercolour, we don't really use white to lighten, we use water to lighten. So just get a little bit more. And you can see, because that has started to dry a little bit, the paint isn't running as much. And we can define the shapes a little bit more. We might go back over here to the focal point now that that background is quite dark or quite wet, but we can just see what happens if we can get a little bit of definition. Yeah. Just hint at some of those petal shapes. I actually don't like that there, so it's just a bit of a weird shape. So you can just work over. If something is too crisp, you can just add a bit of water and pull it out. Now you can see down here, this color has all bled together and we've lost our shape a little bit, but that's fine because again, you can just, where the pigment is pooling, you can just use a little bit of water, a damp brush, and you can just pull it out. And again, we don't really want that, but now it's actually almost getting to the point where you could leave this all to dry and come back later. But maybe before we do that, we can add a little hint of the leaves. So I want to use the same colors that I mentioned at the beginning. This is Senlier Primer Yellow, and all the colors we're going to be using are going to be Senlier colors. They're just some of my favorite watercolors. They're the first artist quality paints that I bought for myself several years ago, and I still really enjoy them today. Now, if we look at this, there isn't really a strong green color here. This green is achieved by mixing the yellow with this phthalo turquoise, which I don't have in this palette. I have in a different palette, so I'm just going to grab some of that. And that's the phthalo turquoise. Now you can see that. Is it a green? Is it a blue? It doesn't really matter. Because we're just going to mix it to make different greens. So if I take some of that and put it with the yellow, you can see that is a very strong, bright spring green. Okay. But if I take the Quin Gold, which is, this is just a fun pigment. It, you can see what it's like. It's very transparent, but it's not really an orange, and it's still quite yellow. But once we mix that with the phthalo turquoise, you'll see something interesting. You can see, if you compare that green to this green, it's just a much more natural color. It's much more like the color of leaves or plants or anything like that. I think because we want to start quite lightly with the leaves, I'm going to take a bit more water and add that in, and we'll keep this, we'll mix all that together, and we'll keep that quite light, maybe a little bit more of the gold. And we'll just, the background is starting to dry, we might get some watermarks, that's okay, but we'll just start adding some indication of the leaves. You can see, because everything else there was in the pink zone, this green is really strong once you start popping it in there. And again, it's very important to watch your subject and observe it, but you know, this is your painting, so you get to decide where those leaves are. They could be, you know, you can copy them exactly, but you can also make decisions about where you want them to be. Where would this look nice? Where would I like to see some green, considering what else is happening in my painting? And again, I'm just taking some clear water and I'm softening out some of those shapes. Here I'm soaking up some of the excess water because I don't want to have too many drips. When you're working vertically like this, your water and colour is going to run. And let's see, there's a hint of flower there, and we can actually even add, there could be some leaves down here, who's to say. And something that's really important to remember as well is when people look at your painting, they don't actually know, they haven't seen your subject. So they're not judging, did you paint that leaf exactly where it was when you looked at, when you saw it. They're just going to judge it by what's in front of them. So it can be important not to get too bogged down in trying to copy things very accurately. As I said, I mean, I love botanical illustration. There's some really, I'll get some more phthalo turquoise. Now, down here, I think I do want to add a bit more green, but I think I want it to be a little darker. Okay, and maybe a little bit more muted. This is still a very strong green, even with this Quin Gold instead of the primer yellow. So one way for us to do that is, well, green is yellow and blue, right? So what if we use a different blue? Instead of that phthalo turquoise, which is almost green, we'll use the ultramarine blue, and look at that. It's much more muted still. So that's going to give just going to hint at these, maybe some darker leaves, more shadowed. We might even get some of that. Here's where the color mixing comes in. This is the alizarin, and if I mix that into the green, red and green are complementaries, so it will get duller still, and we'll get a close to brown color. So I'll just add that here. And you can see how fine, now that that's dry, you can see how fine a line I can get with this quite large brush. But I think it's just a nice idea to add a couple of stems. And again, I am watching, you can't see it on the camera, but I'm actually, my eyes are looking at those flowers in the jar as much almost as the time I spend looking at my painting. So even though this is a very loose, fluid way of painting, it's not, you know, about botanical accuracy. The observation is still really critical. Now, this is still a bit wet, but for the sake of the video, I think we can add some stronger color. So how do I get a stronger color? It's the same thing. I just go back to my pigment, but this time I'm using a lot less water. And there's something that we're going to talk about in the class about tea, milk and honey. So when you start off a painting, you paint with this really light, highly diluted paint, and that's like tea consistency. Then when you get to later stage of the painting and you want to add more definition, and you go, well, this is just really a blob, I can't see that this is fuchsias at all, and the color is really intense in real life, so I want to get some of that intensity in, then we'll start using this more milky consistency. So if you think of the consistency of tea and the consistency of milk, that's really helpful to think about and you can see how much darker that goes on. And again, if you feel like you've put it on too dark, and you're like, well, that's fine, but I didn't really want it as dark as that, you know, that's okay, because this, and you can see I'm getting more crisp edges as well. You can go back to your water, and this brush is not dripping. Okay, that was a drip, but it's just a damp brush, and you can stroke that along the edge of your line, and that will just make the paint spread out, because this is watercolor and it wants to flow. And this is a really nice way of just getting some more distinct shapes. So you can use line and we will get some water marking because this is a little bit wet still. I'm just thinking about the way those petals are going and the shapes. You can even draw with the brush. And of course, what's the other thing about fuchsias that we know? We'll get into that at the end. You'll notice that I haven't done the details like these stamens or anything like that. We're gonna save that right until the end, because what happens is if you're still working with all this wet water, those details are just gonna get smudged out when you're working on the rest of your painting. So I'm just going back over what I painted already, but this time I'm just defining the shapes a little bit more. And you know, this petal is going back there, and we want to have a bit of atmosphere, so I'm not going to outline that petal and make it really stand out. We're going to leave it indistinct like that, and that's going to help add to the looseness and the feeling of transparency and all those kind of things that we want to have in our painting, because this is not a botanical study. This is about just getting a sense of the mood and the gesture and colour of these beautiful fuchsia flowers. I'm actually going to add a few more buds back in over here, strengthen them up. They're kind of bell shaped. And it's so that's one of the things that's useful to think about, just what's the shape, what's the basic shape? Is it a circle? Is it a sphere? Is it like a, I'm going to grab some of that purple, but I'm going to make it a bit stronger again. So more magenta, more ultramarine blue. And I'm just sort of doing the lines. You can see how suddenly it's starting to look a little bit more like there's fuchsias in this painting. And again, while that paint is wet, we can spread those shapes out. These are just indicating of the petals. This is like I always think of fuchsias as like ballerinas, so this is like the frilly skirt, you know. And then think of the stamens as like, you can see how I feel like just for balance I'm going to make this bud into more of an open flower. So again, it's just I'm gonna keep it a bit smaller than the others. And maybe here as well. We're just hinting at, if this branch was on a bush, there'd be more flowers back here. So, a little bit of stronger color again. That's maybe another bud. And see, I've kept my mixes on my palette, so I can go back into those and use them again. We haven't made our greens very strong, but I'm just thinking I might add a little bit. Now as this paper is getting dry, you can do something where dragging the brush on the side that's creating a nice different effect. A more slightly broken open texture. So again, I'm just intensifying the colors that were there already and the shapes. So you can get into all the nitty-gritty detail, and you can look at those leaves up closely and think about where the veins on the leaves are and where does the leaf turn as it curls into the stem. But you know, this is just about being light and fun and keeping things very simple. So they're just little light indicators of where those leaves would be. Now, I think another thing to make your painting just stand out more is to be really bold with color, and that means using it less diluted again. So we talked about tea and milk. Well, there's another kind of consistency that we talk about is honey. And honey is useful to think of. We're not talking about, you know, that stiff, cloudy honey, but more the runny honey. Okay. When you get to the last stage of the painting, and maybe you want to add, in watercolor we're working from light to dark, so maybe, you know, just for a bit of drama you need to get some darks in there. So the thicker the paint, the darker. Remember, the water adds light, so that we use the paint thicker, we're going to get darker notes. Okay, and again, this is still wet, so some of this color is going to bleed out a little bit. You know, so I'm just thinking about where that would be. These are just little spots of detail, and again, if I can add water to make that spread out, look at that. And you know, I don't have to use exactly the same, you know, mixture of color. This is the ultramarine blue and the magenta, but and I leave that as maybe that's a little bit of that light coming through there. or can you see how there's maybe a little bit of that idea of these are starting to look a little more like flowers. And how realistic and how abstract you want to make your painting, that's your choice as well. Now I think it's not quite dry here, but I think we'll have a go adding some of this. I'm choosing a different brush again. It's got a very different shape. It's got a very fine point. The other kind of brush you can use for this, actually maybe I'll just go ahead, because this is a rigger brush. That's what it's called. But it's just useful for adding those fine lines, and it gives you a bit of control over how they're going to look and where they're going to be. So again, the thing is to have this really light touch, you know, and it can be useful to think about where you want your line to be, and just even without touching the paper, just practice making those lines, you know. So then when you do touch the brush to the paper, your line is going where you want it to be. And it's quite nice as if some of it skips. This flower is paler, so I'm going to dilute that colour a little bit more. So we're getting more to a milk consistency again. And now, have we used yellow in this painting? Yes and no, because we used some of the gold to mix with the green, but there's no yellow anywhere else. So do I want to use a strong yellow to paint the little anthers of the pollen? Well, they're not really that strong yellow anyway. So should I use this Quin Gold rather than the primary yellow? Because we haven't actually used that strong yellow in this painting, so maybe it's not a good idea to introduce a new colour. And again, I'm just using a little colour on the tip. This is not a wet dripping brush, it's just got a little colour on the end. And you want to be quite delicate with this. And I'm actually steadying my hand with my little finger, because that's a great trick. And you can see I'm not even joining those onto those lines. I'm leaving a little gap, because that just indicates just how fine those stamens are. And I don't even need to add all of them. Now here it's dark, so they're probably not going to show up. But you can still add little hints of that colour, because it's wet, it's going to bleed out, and I think that's nice. Now, again, it's if you want to add more line at this point of the painting, you can. It can be again, this would be a lot crisper if this was dry, but you know, petals and leaves often have they have those veiny shapes, so you can add some of those in if you want to. I think it's not strictly necessary. Now the other thing is, we added the branch quite early on, and maybe I have decided that I want the branch to stand out more. So I could go over that, or I could decide, no, I actually like that. I'll just leave the branch just being kind of more in the background, less of a focal point. Or I can go back and strengthen it. Or I might decide that I want to strengthen some parts of it and leave other parts. I think I leave this quite, I think it might actually be nice to add this part, because I think that helps the composition of the painting, which is, it's another whole kettle of fish to think about. So I'm going to use the alizarin and some of the ultramarine blue. So this will give us a kind of purple, but it will be quite dark and maybe even a little murky. And you can see that there, it's just a bit more alizarin, making it a bit more reddy again. But this again, this is just darkening that red colour, and I think it's kind of close to the branchy kind of colour. Yeah, I think I will. You can use that on the side as well. Just, it kind of, the thing artists talk about is lost and found, and you can have lost and found edges, lost and found lines, and all that really means is you don't paint the whole thing. You leave these kind of gaps, just like that. But what happens is your eye will, or the viewer's eye will finish those off themselves. That's imagination. I'm making a little bit more of that green with the tallow turquoise, because maybe I just decided to define these. I want to define some of these leaves a little bit more. And look, I'm pulling off the branch. So this is, it's connecting my leaves to that branch. Okay, I don't want such a strong line close to the edge of the painting, so I'll just smudge that away. My water is a bit dirty at this stage, so it's going to be a bit pink, but that's fine. Now, I'm going to say for now this painting is finished. You could change you could leave it all to dry. You could come back to it the next day and you could decide there's one or two little things you want to change. So, but it's good to take a break. And the one thing we'll do is you know, you should sign your paintings. So, is this dry? Yeah, we can sign it here. And again, you can actually practice this not on a painting if you like, if you find it difficult. But I'm just steadying my hand here. An easel. And there it is. Loose and fluid fuchsias. You know what, we might just do one last thing. This is something that's maybe a little overused in watercolor painting sometimes, but it is fun to do. And this is spatter. So maybe we'll just add a little hint of it back here. Like that. Okay, just giving a sense of those flowers dripping down. We might even do a little bit of spatter with the Queen Gold, even though we haven't used a lot of it in the painting. One thing I would do is, if I really wanted to make a strong feeling of sunlight or something, I like to put a yellow wash or a gold wash on one of the corners of the painting, because that just gives that nice sunshiny feel. This is tapping very, very lightly, and there we go. I feel like that's enough. If your spatter goes on too strong, or you don't like where it is, you can take a wet, damp brush and you can just, look at that, you can just brush that out. And then left some of that in there closer to the focal point. So there we go. So if you want to know more, you can come to the workshop. It's going to be at my house. It's just going to be very casual, This is the first time I've done a workshop, and we're just going to have fun and play around with watercolour.